This lecture will conclude the series of the Jewish question. And the topic of this lecture is the state of Israel, the Jewish state. And it feels so poignant to be concluding this series on the state of Israel on the day after the first anniversary of the 7th of October. And that's because this past year has really, shall we say, felt like the very question of the state of Israel, or that the state of Israel has been brought into question in a way that has felt shocking and distressing, to so many of us, and of course, so detached from reality and the significance of the state of Israel, not only to the kind of the long span of Jewish history back to ancient Israel, but within the context of this Jewish question that both Jews and non-Jews have been grappling with since the 18th century. And we've seen how this question began really largely even with non-Jews around a recognition that we had, that the world had come to embrace in the West, humanism, notions of equality and fairness and justice. And yet those places had been so, shall we say, familiar with ideas of anti-Semitism and persecution and exclusion of Jews. And so as those two conflicting principles kind of came into conflict with each other, non-Jews in England and other places were wondering, well, how do Jews fit into the modern state? Isn't it only right that Jews should be equal like anybody else in line with modern Western ideology of humanistic beliefs? But we know that Jews continue to face persecution and exclusion in the West and certainly in other places, outright anti-Semitism, whether kind of the extreme persecutions in places like Eastern Europe and Russia, or continuing to be treated as second-class citizens in Muslim countries in North Africa and elsewhere. And so Jews were also wondering, we're asking this Jewish question, certainly as you move into the 19th century. And we saw how Sir Moses Montefiore in the middle of the century attempted to resolve it by kind of having localized attempts at resolving local instances of anti-Semitism. But that as you move into the later 19th century, it's felt that that's really not resolving the issue in a broader sense. And so Baron Hirsch suggests Jewish displacement, mass Jewish migration, and he says that needs to not be in Europe, that needs to be to shall we say, new places where Jews can become farmers, and he creates settlements in Argentina, ultimately not a largely successful endeavor. And then as you get to the end of the 19th century, you have, shall we say, the most radical, but the most obvious of solutions put forward by Theodor Herzl, which is that Jews have to have the opportunity to have self-determination. Like all other nations that were doing nation building during this time, Jews also should have that right. And he put forward the creation of a Congress to create this vision, to kind of push forward this effort to create a place of Jewish independence. Now, the most obvious place where that would be was, of course, in the ancient land of Israel. It had been renamed by the Romans to be Palestine. But of course, it was controlled by the Ottoman Empire, who had been controlling it for, well, hundreds of years. There was no independent country there. It was part of the Ottoman Empire. And so at first, Jews tried to, Herzl among them, tried to convince the Ottomans to create not a state, but an autonomous zone in that land where Jews could have political autonomy. And they weren't supportive of that. And so all you have kind of during those early years are are kind of increasing Jewish migration, Jews moving to places where there had already been Jewish communities in that land for centuries, or purchasing land and creating new Jewish towns. But shall we say, no clear prospect of creating an autonomous area, certainly not a state. That all changes in the Great War, the First World War, where after decades of decline, the Ottoman Empire crumbles. And you then have European countries moving into places where the Ottoman Empire had been to create provisional, shall we say, governments in those places. And Britain came to control ancient Israel, right, the Holy Land, Palestine. And they looked at the population and they said, well, there's lots of Jews who live here. And they put forward a vision of creating a Jewish state. That was put forward in the Balfour Declaration in 1917. Of course, great excitement amongst the Jews living in Israel. And they renew their efforts to create the institutions that would be necessary to sustain a modern state, a modern Jewish state. But ultimately, pushback among Arabs prevent Britain, shall we say, implementing that vision. And in fact, Britain begins to limit migration of Jewish people to what was supposed to be a future Jewish state. The real, shall we say, calamity of that decision becomes clear in the Second World War. Without actually creating a Jewish state, with limiting migration of Jews to there, it creates the opportunity for Hitler and the Nazis to come forward and to say, well, in light of the fact that there's been no successful solution to the Jewish question, we're going to just put forward a final solution, which to them was extermination of Jewish people. And that heinous crime that kills 6 million Jewish people, as it should have, ultimately shocks the world. And after the Second World War, the creation of the United Nations, the nations of the world gathered together and they say it is finally time to create a Jewish state. But not just one state, two states. One that will be a Jewish majority country and one that will be a Muslim majority country, an Arab country. This is known as the Partition Plan. And we know that the Jews living in Israel embrace this. They celebrate this, that finally, yes, it won't be, shall we say, what they had thought the country would look like, but that it would be an independent Jewish state, and that was a reason for celebration. Sadly, we know that the Arabs reject this determination of the United Nations, and when Israel is declared a state, they are immediately attacked by their Arab neighbors. But amazingly, miraculously, these Jews defend themselves. And in the end, they create a state largely along the borders of the Partition Plan, not exactly, but largely. Curiously, the Jordanians take control of what's often called the West Bank, and they don't create an independent Arab country there. They simply incorporate it into Jordan. And so, shall we say, the position of Arabs in the territory of Palestine simply persists, that they are ruled by, other Arabs or other Muslims as they had been for centuries, while the Jewish state is created alongside them. And you finally have, shall we say, this great experiment of what would it look like when Jews finally have self-determination. No longer are they limited by anti-Semitism or persecution in whether outright persecution or even kind of the kinds of anti-Semitism and exclusion that they felt in even Western Europe, which had ostensibly been providing equality to Jewish people. And you find that the state flourishes, not only in the ways we think of today, of kind of with technology and security, but in science and in the arts and in academia. There is this great flourishing of this potential of Jewish people to finally pursue their dreams, to live their best selves without the restrictions of persecution and anti-Semitism, and they create a flourishing country, which of course is is remarkable, despite the fact that sadly the conflicts that existed, during that time have continued to persist. While some countries have made peace with Israel, we know others haven't, and Israel continues to grapple with the threats that it faces, and obviously the persistent question of the future of Arabs who live in that land. The ones who live in the state of Israel have been granted equality with the Jews who live there, but that ultimately, obviously, the Arabs who live in other parts, continue to struggle for their self-determination, and Israel grapples with helping them to create that without it putting Israel's own self-determination in question at the same time. And we obviously know that is an incredibly complicated matter. But what can't be complicated is, of course, the rights of Jews to self-determination in their own homeland. And amazingly, they've created a country which is a Jewish country. It celebrates the day off on Saturday, the Sabbath, on Shabbat. The Jewish festivals have become the national holidays: Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot, Passover. You have the ancient Jewish language, Hebrew, which has become the official language of the state of Israel, and that in many ways it has the contours of a Jewish country while being a secular, modern, democratic state that provides equality to all of its citizens, and as I mentioned, has really achieved remarkable things. And so I think, shall we say, the experiment of Israel has proven itself, that Jewish people finally being unfettered, from of anti-Semitism, have been able to flourish and make great contributions to the world. Sadly, the conflicts have continued without any easy solution to them, but we can all appreciate how magnificent that will be. When Israel can live in peace, can find solutions to these, challenging problems, and can also continue to manifest as beautifully as it has over the years. I think the thing that's, shall we say, striking and kind of thinking about, a year into this war is, as we hear people incredibly, calling the state of Israel into question in places where Jews have, historically felt really safe and secure in America and in England, and the Jews, in these places feel so shocked by that. All that actually does is reinforced even more Jews' commitment to Israel, of recognizing, well, maybe Jews aren't always fully secured or free to be fully themselves in those places, and it makes the state of Israel even more important than it had been before. And indeed, that has been an important characteristic of the Jewish state, is that it has seen itself as that answer to the Jewish question, which is why the state of Israel created the right of return, the rights of Jews wherever they live to move to Israel if they choose to do so, whether out of persecution or simply love and opportunity, and that they would then have a place to live as Jews openly and as successfully as their skills allow for. And so in that way, the state of Israel has been the answer to the Jewish question, the perhaps obvious, but it took a bit of time to get there, this idea of Jewish self-determination. And while it struggles through the challenges, of course, it's never going back. The state of Israel, thank God, is here to stay, and it will continue to be a source of pride and hopefully success for the Jewish people, while at the same time we, of course, pray for peace for all the peoples in the region. But what this course has, shall we say, brought home to me is the importance of thinking about these topics to understand the full context of the world in which we find ourselves in today. And so I'm going to be doing 2 additional series in the months ahead. One is going to be on the history of anti-Semitism, and we'll look at the way that it's manifest throughout the centuries, which is really important to be thinking about in the forms of modern-day anti-Semitism. And we'll also have a series, and this is a bit anachronistic, I'm calling it Sephardi Zionism, not limited to what we think of official Zionism of the 19th and 20th century, kind of that political national aspiration, but the love or connection to Israel that has been displayed by Sephardi Jews, from medieval times through the creation of the State of Israel. And I hope that both of those classes will help, shall we say, round out this series, the topic of the Jewish question, anti-Semitism, and Zionism, or Sephardi Zionism, Sephardi connection to Israel, and will help enrich our understanding of the world we live in today, both its challenges and, please God, all of its opportunities. So thank you so much for joining me on this journey as we explored the Jewish question.